Okay, and we are ready to start. Our topic today is Moreh Nevukhim, Section 1, Chapter 34. The topic of the chapter we would call the 5 causes that prevent acquisition of esoteric knowledge. Before I get started today, we're living in quite unusual times. Allow me to offer some thoughts. First of all, there are a number of people that we recognize that have already succumbed to this horrible magefa, this horrible plague that we are currently experiencing worldwide. And I would like to suggest that the Torah study that we hopefully will accomplish today should be in the memory of those people who have fallen, and that they should have an aliyat neshama, that their souls should have an elevation and ascend straight to Shemayim. The second thing I wanted to say is that it is times like this when we are looking for inspiration and we are trying to connect with something that is much higher than ourselves, and we are trying to emotionally connect with things that are otherworldly. It almost seems like the study of Jewish philosophy, of Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed, may seem to be somewhat out of place. It almost makes there are life and death issues that people are facing today, and to get into quite esoteric philosophical topics of the intellect seem to be perhaps even a luxury that we should not be affording to ourselves. I think that there might be some great thinkers who might be of that opinion. I feel that perhaps Rebbe Yehuda Halevi would have viewed this as to be perhaps a counterproductive exercise in the times in which we're living, where we're supposed to be trying to find more direct channels towards spirituality than the intellect. But I think for the Rambam, his most direct channel to the divine, his entree and his whole approach to coming close to Hashem, coming close to God, was via the intellect. And therefore, there is a place for this kind of study, even during times such as these where we are looking for the great, meaningful, purposeful solutions and discussions of the meaning of life. I think the Rambam would find it especially meaningful to study Jewish philosophy at this time. So to whatever extent that we would like to put on our Maimonidean thinking hats for the next half hour, that might be a good idea. But in any event, let's try and move forward with our study, because if anything, the Jew who lives with purpose is a person who lives with a set of disciplines and works through a regimented schedule. And because this is our regimented schedule, that on Monday mornings we meet and we study for half an hour for Moreh Nevukhim, this is what we'll do. And this will continue our way of life, and hopefully it'll bring us and see us through on the other end of whatever we're meant to come through with at the end of this entire ordeal, this entire experience. Well, we're beginning chapter 34 today with that prelude stated. We're beginning chapter 34 today, and in chapter 34, the Rambam is going to embark on something that he told us he was going to do at the end of chapter 33. At the end of chapter 33, he said, "I will make clear to you the cause that prevents the instruction of the multitude to the veritable methods of speculation, and that prevents their being taught to begin to grasp the essences of things as they are." Essentially, what the Rambam has said is that in having established in last week's chapter, in chapter 33, that the study of metaphysics, the study of the divine realm, and all of these other very, very difficult esoteric topics that transcend our world, the fact that they're difficult to grasp, why is that? Or what are the causes for those things to be so difficult to grasp for the average human being? And why is it that only very few people succeed in actually achieving this endeavor in the way that it can be truly appreciated? We learned a little bit about the 4 who entered into the Pardes, as the Talmud in Chagiga says, 4 who entered into philosophical speculation, and only 1, Rebbe Akiva, was able to emerge unscathed. The other ones were either damaged or came out with horrible misunderstandings of and with a damaged intellect. And so why is that? In other words, what causes people to fall short of this endeavor? The Rambam is going to tell us that there are 5 causes. Now, when he says 5 causes, he's not telling us why God made it this way. The reason why God made it this way may be something that the Rambam never actually touches upon. Rebbe Yehuda Halevi, however, does discuss this a little bit in his Sefer Kuzari. He says, why is it that only the Jewish people receive the Torah? Why didn't God give the Torah to all of mankind? I think a similar question could be, is it even this intellectual elite that we are discussing today, who are able to grasp very divine esoteric ideas, why is it such a small percentage of humankind? And I think the answer to those 2 questions is the same. Rebbe Yehuda Halevi sees a pattern in all of nature. He says, look, when you think about the entire mass of the ecosystem, a very small percentage of that mass is actually the fruit of creation. Take, for example, a tree, an apple tree. You have roots, you have a trunk, you have bark, you have branches, you have leaves, and only a small percentage of that tree, the mass, the actual volume and weight and density of that tree is apples. So it's true. The only thing that we can benefit from is the apple, which is perhaps 10% of the mass of the tree, of the entire tree. And yet the rest of the structure of that tree is there to produce the apple. And God created a world in which sometimes the produce of that world is a very small percentage of the world. That doesn't necessarily explain why the whys and the wherefores of why God made the world this way, but we certainly see a pattern like that, in that not everything is meant to achieve perfection in this world. Not every component of creation is meant to achieve the apex. Every component of creation contributes to the production of the fruit, but not every component of creation is the fruit in and of itself. But that's really not the topic of the Rambam today. The topic of the Rambam today is what actually are the causes? What inhibits man from being able to attain ultimate knowledge, especially of esoteric concepts like metaphysics, like issues of the divine, and trying to understand God in his truest of essences? And he says that there are 5 reasons. Today, I wanted to be able to discuss the 5 reasons outside. I do have a handout for today's discussion. You can find it in the Facebook group, Shiur in Moreh Nevukhim, and it's in JPEG form, and you can just download it or reference it now. While you're on Facebook, just open up another tab and you can just pull it down. But the 5 causes summarized, I'm going to mention it as follows. Number 1, the Rambam says, is the difficulty of the material. Ontologically, without getting into what human beings are capable of understanding or not, the material itself is, by its nature, inaccessible to the human mind in most instances, because it's extremely difficult. It's conceptual stuff that is not relatable to this world. And that's the first thing that makes this material so difficult to grasp, the discussion of metaphysics. Reason number 2, insufficiency of people's minds. And as the Rambam will discuss in reason number 2, he's going to point out to us that not everyone has a completely developed intellect. And even people who have great proficiency and are born with God-given talents to achieve great intellectual heights, at different stages of their lives simply have not fulfilled their potential yet. And so that's the second factor, is that sometimes people have difficulty because they have certain intellectual limitations. So that's the ontological reason, is because the material itself is difficult. The epistemological reason is that people's minds are limited. That's reason number 2. Reason number 3, the immenseness of the prerequisite knowledge, is that there's a huge amount of prerequisite knowledge that a person has to get under their belt before they're ready to embark on the very advanced topic of studying metaphysics, and that we had spoken about last time as well. And for some people, it's just too difficult to go through all of that prerequisite knowledge. It's like the person who wants to become a neurosurgeon, but is loath to go through 8 years of prerequisite study. You can't, even though much of that study is tedious and laborious, but you need it in order to be able to get to that ultimate goal of being a neurosurgeon. Right? The same thing is true if you want to be a metaphysician, if you want to be an expert in metaphysics. You have to go through a huge amount of prerequisite knowledge, and it's just the human nature is to shy away from a huge amount of knowledge, a huge amount of study, in order to be able to get to the final goal. Cause number 4 is lack of proper temperament and virtues, is what the Rambam is describing. And basically he says you have to have a certain moral compass, and you have to have a certain temperament, a certain personality trait in order to be able to acquire knowledge correctly. And a lot of times, sometimes people are prone to impatience. Sometimes people are prone to anger. Sometimes people are prone to emotional responses when they're not called for. And this is what he calls temperament and virtue, is that a lot of this is nature, what you're born with, and a lot of it is nurture. But every human being is born with a different temperament, a different personality, a set of traits, and not every person has the capacity with the traits that they currently possess to be able to acquire a certain level of esoteric knowledge, because it is their personality traits that inhibit them. And we'll get to that more as well. And finally, the distractions of the physical world. And that is that no matter how much a person would like to study, a lot of times there are distractions. A person has a wife or a husband and children, and they have a job, and they have all of these other responsibilities to the outside world that pull them away from engaging into this kind of endeavor. So, for example, as I started with today, right, there are so many things that are distracting us right now. I personally find it very difficult to concentrate on lofty ideas when we're facing life and death issues outside, and we're told about all of these things that we have to do to distance ourselves. And on top of that, we're getting ready for the Pesach holiday, and all of these other things are distractions, and they cause us to lose the ability to focus on very lofty and esoteric ideas. Those are the 5 reasons, and I just want to properly explain the structure that the Rambam is presenting to us now. And I want to use the Abarbanel in his introduction to this chapter to sort of frame what's going on over here. You know, we're going to sing at the Seder Dayenu. Dayenu is a structured song. Ilu hotziyanu mimitzrayim. If God had taken us out of Egypt, velo asa vahem shafatim dayenu, and he had not done all of those miracles against the Egyptians, that would have been sufficient. We then go on to the next part, which is ilu asa vahem shafatim velo asa velo hehem dayenu. If God had only done miracles to punish the Egyptians, but did not humble their gods, that too would have been sufficient. Dayen, enough of a reason for us to thank God. Well, it's actually a song that each line builds on the previous line. Ilu hotzianu mimitzrayim, if God had taken us out of Egypt and not done miracles, that would have been enough. If he did the miracles, but only against the Egyptians, not against their gods, that would have been enough. But implicit in the second line is that if God had only done the first 2, that would have been dayenu. In other words, the point is that you're building a structure where each line builds upon the previous line and says that even if he had done all of those previous things and not done this new thing, that would have been sufficient. When the Rambam presents his 5 causes as to why people have difficulty attaining this knowledge, he's actually building a structure in the same way. And the way that the Abarbanel presents it is as follows. He says, why is it that so many people fall short of attaining this type of metaphysics, this type of esoteric knowledge? He says, number 1, it's the difficulty of the material. It just is so inaccessible to so many people because it's inherently difficult material. And the second argument is basically, even if the material was not deep, okay, even if there's building on cause number 1, even if the material wasn't deep, it would still be inaccessible to people. Why? Because of reason number two, because of the insufficiency of so many people's minds. That the human intellect is limited in its structure to process concepts that are outside of the three dimensions of space and the dimension of time, right? So that's, even if reason number one didn't apply, there's still a reason or a cause for why people have so much difficulty attaining this knowledge, because of the limitations of the human mind. Reason number three, that the failure that people have to attain this knowledge, even if the knowledge is accessible, and even if people's minds are not limited, there's a third factor, and that is that what? The prerequisites to get to a certain point of understanding are extremely laborious and painstaking. And so therefore, even without reason number one, even without reason number two, you still have a third factor that contributes to this. And then we go to number four. Even if the information is accessible, and even if people's intellects are not limited, and even if people are able to get through the laborious prerequisite knowledge, but there's a fourth issue that becomes difficult to surmount, and that is the fact that people's temperaments sometimes prevent them from attaining the knowledge. And then we go into reason number five. Even if the information is accessible, even if people's minds are not limited, even if they're able to get past the prerequisites, and even if they have the proper temperament, there is still something that would inhibit a person from being able to attain this knowledge, and that is the distractions and the vicissitudes of Olam Hazeh, of this Olam Hagashmi, this physical world. So that's the reason why he builds this structure the way he does. Okay. Now, there's another point that I want to make before we get into the text itself, and that is, if you look back at the end of chapter 31, I know, and this is if we're using the Pines edition of the Moreh Nevukhim, and I'd like you to refer back, if you have the text in front of you, to page 66. The Rambam had already given a smaller discussion on this very issue. Why is it that people have difficulty attaining esoteric knowledge, and so few people are actually successful at it? And so he quoted a great philosopher from the 1st and 2nd centuries named Alexander of Aphrodisias, one of the primary interpreters of Aristotle, especially for the Arabic world. And he said, if you take a look at the bottom of page 66, he said that there are three causes of disagreement about things. Why is it that people disagree about basic ideas, especially esoteric ideas? He says reason number one is the domination and love of strife. People love to argue. So even if something is patently true, but if my chavruta across the table said it, I have a natural tendency to want to disagree. And that's why people have a tendency to not arrive at consensus of knowledge. The second cause is the subtlety and the obscurity of the object of apprehension in itself and the difficulty of apprehending it. He combined causes 1 and 2 sort of into each other. That's saying that the knowledge is very difficult to apprehend. There are certain ideas that are very difficult to grasp. And then the third cause is the ignorance of the person who apprehends and his inability to grasp things that it is possible to apprehend. So reason number 2 and reason number 3 are really cause 1 and 2 that the Rambam is saying in our chapter. So reason number 1 is machloket. Reason number 2 is the difficulty of the material. And reason number 3 is that people's intellects are limited. Now, in our chapter, he has neglected that issue of what are the as a cause of people failing to acquire esoteric knowledge, because of the natural tendency to be argumentative and to disagree with what somebody else says. Let's put that aside for a second. But then the Rambam at the end of chapter 31 had said that there's a fourth reason as to why people tend to disagree and not arrive at consensus. And that is because of habituation. That people grow up in communities where there are preconceived notions that are based on culture and based on social mores, and people sometimes can't get past those ideas because they are too entrenched within the social setting in which they find themselves. So the Rambam had said that the reason why Alexander of Aphrodisias did not offer that as a reason why people don't arrive at consensus is because philosophers, by their nature, transcend social mores and cultural restraints. And that's what a true philosopher is. And therefore, he didn't count that, but at least I can count it as explaining why it is that my fellow Jews have such difficulty arriving at consensus as far as what is truth. So the Barbanel really raises an interesting point. He says, in our chapter, the Rambam lists 5 causes as to why people have difficulty attaining and successfully an esoteric knowledge of metaphysics. Why didn't he include the 2 reasons that he mentioned in chapter 31? One of them being that people are argumentative by nature, and therefore even if the truth is glaring at them in the face, if someone that they don't want to agree with said it, they will find reasons to disagree. And reason number 4 that he had mentioned in chapter 31, which is the cultural restraints, that when people grow up with certain preconceived notions that are accepted as basic truths and postulates of society, that are axiomatic to society, people are loath to reject them, and they don't look further. So he points out that reason number 1 and reason number 4 and that the Rambam had brought in chapter 31 are things that people can easily transcend. As the Rambam himself had said in chapter 31, if you're a philosopher and you're a truth seeker, then you can easily transcend the cultural restraints that prevent you from seeing past what everyone else in your society accepts as axiomatic. But even the idea of argumentativeness, that people are competitive by nature, and they don't want to acknowledge the truth that is offered by somebody else. He says that's not a real truth seeker as well. He says, I'll grant you that philosophers sometimes, even the greatest of philosophers, because there's a competitive spirit among philosophers, will sometimes deliberately disagree even when that's counterproductive. But a true truth seeker, which is what the Rambam is describing in chapter 34, a real truth seeker will be able to get past that as well, and will be able to say, you know what, accept the truth from whatever source it comes from, and we have to get past that. What the Rambam is discussing in this chapter is not impediments that are subject to people's, let's say, personality flaws that may inhibit someone who's not really seeking the truth in its truest form. But here we're talking about people who sincerely desire to divest themselves of all of their personality flaws and really, really get to the truth. Even among those people who are the truest of truth seekers, there are still going to be things that really just get in their path and prevent them from moving forward. No matter how much the desire is to attain the truth, these factors, these 5 factors, will invariably put up roadblocks to the vast majority of people who enter into this endeavor. Now, why is he telling us all of this? It's very possible that he is presenting us with a challenge. He's throwing down a gauntlet and basically saying, you've gotten this far in Moreh Nevukhim, how much farther are you prepared to go? Are you going to look at one of these 5 causes and say, well, he's got me there. I don't have the prerequisite knowledge, or I don't have the proper temperament to delve any further into this endeavor. That may be very, very possible because he's trying to sort of shed the weakest of the class and get them to drop out at some point, because it's just like taking a very, very difficult course in university. You could start with hundreds of students and eventually only end up with a handful because everyone else realizes eventually that this is not meant for me. Is that the Rambam's explanation for why he's saying it over here? I don't know. I don't think it's necessarily that he's deliberately trying to turn away the students, but he is pointing out that if you're going to go any further, you have to be prepared to work. It is a struggle, and it is going to require a little bit of schwitzing in order to be able to get past some of the difficult obstacles on the road. and also appreciate the fact that not everyone is going to attain the same amount of successful goals. One person may reach only this level and another person may reach a higher level, every person according to their ability. All right, so let's start off. We'll just probably look at the first or second cause today. He says the first cause, on the bottom of page 72, is the difficulty, subtlety, and obscurity of the matter in itself. And therefore he quotes a pasuk to point this out, a pasuk from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes, chapter 7, verse 24. Rachok ma shehaya, ve'amok amok mi yimtzaenu. According to the commentaries, this pasuk can be divided into two parts. What was is very distant, and it is very, very deep. Who can find it? Those are the first part of the verse and the second part of the verse are referring to two different things. The first part of the verse of that which was refers to Ma'aseh V'Reshit, refers to the story of creation. It is very far from us. It is very difficult, which is why the Mishnah in Chagiga had said it's one of those things that you have to limit the speculation about. The amok mi yimtzaenu, the second part of the verse, refers to metaphysics, Ma'aseh Merkava. It is so deep. Who has really the ability to find it properly? So that's certainly a support for the Rambam as the way that the Meforshim explain it. And it also says, but wisdom, v'hachochma me'ayin timatzeh, a pasuk in Job, where can wisdom be found? Now, it is not fitting in teaching to begin with what is most difficult and obscure for the understanding. It's meaning that this can't be the starting point. You can't say, I'm just going to jump into the deep end. One of the parables generally known in our community is that likening knowledge to water. The sages, peace on them, explain several notions by means of this parable. One of them being that he who knows how to swim brings up pearls from the bottom of the sea, whereas he who does not know drowns. For this reason, no one should expose himself to the risks of swimming except he who has been trained in learning to swim. Meaning, knowledge in general, and specifically Torah knowledge, is compared to water in a number of places. Hoi kol tzamei l'chu lamayim, the prophet says, whoever is thirsty, let them go for water. The Rambam had used that pasuk before. And various midrashim compare the Torah to water. But water in itself is multifaceted. It's not monolithic. You can stay in the shallow end and only look at the surface water. But if you really want to get to the most valuable water, which contains the most treasures within it, you go to the very, very deep water. But it's not so easy accessing the deep water. You have to be a trained a diver in order to be able to know how to go down into the very bottom of the ocean bed, and to be able to get the pearls that are lying in the mouths of the clams at the bed of the ocean. So therefore, yes, it's true, water is a metaphor for knowledge, but there's different levels of knowledge. You can benefit from the cursory knowledge, but if you really want to get the most valuable knowledge, you have to learn how to dive deep, and that's not so easy. It's very, very difficult, and it's for many people is inaccessible. It's quite interesting. Rav Kafich in his footnotes points to a Gemara, a very strange Gemara in Bava Batra Daf Ayin Dalid, in the chapter of Hamocheret Hasfina, which has a passage of Agadic stories, which are probably the most fanciful stories in all of Shas and all of the Talmud. And one of those stories having to do with seafarers is as follows. It's on page 74, bottom of 74a, top of page 74b in Tractate Bava Batra. It's in source number 3 that you have in front of you. And with this story, we will conclude. I guess we won't have time to do more than cause number 1 today. Rabbi Yochanan Mishtoi. Rabbi Yochanan was once speaking, relating the following story. Zimna chada havaka azlinan bisfinta. One day I was traveling in a ship. V'chazinan hahi kartalita dahavuka mikavi iba avanim tovotu margaliot. And I happened to sight in the water that there was a chest, a treasure chest, in the water, I guess in the bottom of the ocean, and in that chest, perhaps it was open so he could see the contents, there were precious stones and pearls. Vahadrila mini de kavari de mikri karsha. The treasure chest was surrounded by dangerous species of fish. Perhaps they're sharks. They're called karshas, the type of fish. Nachit ba bar amoroi la'atuya. And a diver dove down into the depths of the ocean in order to bring up this treasure chest. Viragash uboi l'shamte la'atme. This dangerous shark saw the diver and wanted to bite off his leg. So vishada zika dechala vinachat. So what did the diver do? He had a flask of vinegar. He spritzed out the vinegar towards the shark, and the shark, it was like a shark repellent. I'm not sure if this works. Don't try it at home. And the vinegar scared off the shark or repelled the shark, and he was able to bring up the treasure chest. Nafak bat kala omarlan. A heavenly voice emanated at that point and said to us, perhaps this diver was our representative, bringing the treasure chest back to us on the boat. Mai itluchu bahadi kartalita de Davitu de Rebbe Hanina ben Dosa. And he said, what business do you have with the treasure chest that belongs to the wife of Rebbe Hanina ben Dosa? Now, obviously, this is very metaphorical. This is very deep. Rebbe Hanina ben Dosa and his wife were very, very poor. And the Gemara elsewhere relates a story that one day a hand came down from heaven to help Rebbe Hanina ben Dosa with his poverty and presented him with a very, very valuable, priceless gem. And when he brought it home to his wife said, I don't want gifts from heaven, because whatever they give you from heaven is they're going to be deducting from your portion in the world to come. So I'd rather keep your portion in the world to come intact, give back the gem. And so she made him go back, find the hand from heaven, and place it back in the hand from heaven, and the gem was retrieved and brought back up to heaven, and ostensibly, according to this story, placed in this treasure chest, which is some kind of metaphor for the idea that a person should not try to delve deep into the oceans of Torah, pull out something that perhaps is not meant for this world, when in reality it is being preserved for the esoteric knowledge that we will attain in the world to come. After all, Rebbe Hanina, Mrs. Rebbe Hanina ben Dosa, Rebbetzin Hanina ben Dosa, will eventually use that treasure chest to make techelet, the blue dye, for the tzaddikim's tzitzis in the world to come. And whatever that means is not really clear. It's from Rashi, it almost sounds like she will put techelet in that treasure chest, so therefore you shouldn't take it now. It's not really clear what that meaning is, but clearly this whole imagery that the Gemara is relating to us has to do with this idea of the water representing divine knowledge of reality. You can go stay at the surface and understand the world as it is, as it appears to us, and you can dive deeper and deeper and deeper until you finally get to the ultimate treasure chest. And at some point, a heavenly voice says, stop. This is not something that you are meant to have in this world. It's reserved exclusively for the next world. And that's why the Rambam compares Torah knowledge to deep sea diving. If you don't have the skill, because you're not properly trained, you're going to drown. And so that's the reason why it's so difficult. Cause number one, it's just difficult. It's really very difficult to access this material. And unless you have the proper training, it's not going to work for you. I think this is a good place for us to stop. We will probably not be having class until after Pesach. If the plan changes, I will notify you. I want to wish you all a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a very, very happy, stress-free, joyous Pesach that is filled with great knowledge and great understanding. May God give us the discernment to be able to make sense of all of that is happening today. So even for those Maimonideans out there who serve Hashem with their intellect, may He give us the skill and the knowledge to be able to fully understand what is going on, and help us find simcha, joy in our living, in our everyday life, and really just appreciate just one more day. Have a wonderful, wonderful day and a good Pesach.